Hello everyone, this is Sonia Byers, CEO of Women in Transport, and you're listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Here we uncover how the intersection of identities produces different experiences for different people. While some identities may be more privileged due to their class, race, gender or faith, others may experience inordinate discrimination. Join us as we hear from the Women in Transport and take an inspiring and analytical lens through which we will understand how power and privilege interface and cross over.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Women in Transport podcast, where we dig deep into understanding the intersections of the women in transport and how we can thrive. This time around, we're lifting the lid on inclusive recruitment and moving beyond bias. This episode is supported by Diversity in Recruitment, helping agency and internal recruiters get to grips with diversity and inclusion. Find out more in the description of this episode or head over to diversityinrecruitment.com. I'm your host, Shireen Ali Khan, and today I am joined by...
Hi, my name's Naomi Barringer. I'm HR Director for TRL Limited, which stands for the Transport Research Laboratory. I've been at this organisation 13 and a half years. I think our diversity and inclusivity is pretty good at the moment, but I think we could do better when it comes to recruitment.
I'm Laura Taylor, so I'm HR Director and also Company Secretary for the RHA, which is the Road Haulage Association. I've been there for nearly 7 years, and prior to that I worked in a number of different organisations in HR, and before that I was actually an employment lawyer. And yeah, diversity and inclusion is obviously really important to us, and we have this year kick-started Equity at Work group and a real focus and strategy around that.
So I'm Mark Lomas. I'm head of culture at Lloyd's of London, with previous experience being head of diversity at HS2 Limited.
My name's Jo Major. I'm founder of Diversity in Recruitment, a training and advice consultancy that specifically works with recruiters, agency in-house, and also hiring managers to help them get to grips with diversity, inclusion, equity, and all that great stuff, and encourages them to look at the reasons why people are underrepresented within their organisations and how they can be an extension to their overall ED&I strategy as a recruitment team and make what they do inclusive, accessible and equitable. My background is recruitment. I've been in the recruitment space for 23 years. Over 17 years as an actual recruiter before I moved into a global training role, and got to a point in my career where actually I started to question my own identity and how it was potentially impacting my career trajectory. Like a lot of people that get into ED&I, it's based on when we start to experience things for ourselves, and then we're like, hang on a minute, and then admittedly I didn't know much about how the way that I recruited created barriers for people until I actually started to do the work and educate myself. That was triggered by my own experience, rightly or wrongly. It just happened that way. And now what I do is I try to encourage recruiters not to wait to that point where they start to face discrimination and prejudice, and actually start to do the work for other people, even if it doesn't, directly impact their career trajectory or how they look for jobs.
Brilliant, thank you, Jo. And on that, I think that takes us really nicely into our first question. Some of our listeners might be, wondering why we've picked recruitment as a topic around inclusivity. But is there a problem? Is this something we should be discussing? What are your thoughts around that?
Is there a problem? Yeah, I think there's a huge problem. I think that, hiring people into businesses has almost become like a movement. We talk more and more around equality, diversity, equity, inclusion. And some businesses, or should I say a lot of businesses, let's be totally honest, they feel that the solution is to hire in. They've suddenly realised that, they're massively overrepresented by majority groups in their organisation. And instead of looking at the systemic and structural reasons why that's happening, it's like, let's just hire in. Let's just take a look around our business, and by a look, I actually mean a visual look, not a deep dive sense check driven by data, of who's potentially missing, and let's plug our recruitment teams, our recruitment businesses, search agencies into that, and let's just go out there and hire people because they, visually look different. And I think that is, this massively damaging for the lived experience of people who are historically marginalised, right? Does absolutely nothing for equality. It's leading to a lot of tokenistic work, revolving door situations, and we are, hiring people to sort out your diversity issues is not the solution. That comes towards the end when you've actually done the work to discover, why are we only just noticing that this is a problem now, and what are the reasons why we've got an issue with majority groups being overrepresented in our business. And I think if we continue down this route, all we are doing is setting back equality in employment. And I absolutely believe in an equity first strategy, getting your house in order, doing the work, which requires lots of resources, lots of investment and people within your business, and and actually building your equity, going, working your way up the pyramid, your equity piece, your equality piece, your inclusion piece, your belonging piece, and then you're ready for your diversity piece. And I think a lot of the time ED&I people are focused on too much of the performative stuff to try and attract people into their businesses, and what they're not empowered to look at the systemic and structural reasons as to why there's the problem in the first place. And I think it's an absolute, for me personally, I believe it's the wrong way to go. But it's the easiest route.
Mark, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting topic, and one thing that I think I've experienced a lot of working with recruitment teams, recruiters, and even D&I professionals, is the level of technical skill isn't where it should be. So how can you advise your recruitment or talent team around inclusive recruitment other than advertise here, this, that, and the other? If you're unfamiliar with what an inclusive job description is, if you're unable to advise an organization about the accessibility of its recruitment portals, etc., if you're unsure of the type and model of recruitment you use for various parts of the recruitment strategy. So I think in the main I agree. I don't think that hiring alone is the issue. But again, that comes back to both the will and the skill to do it. So a lot of organizations say they have the will to change something on D&I, but they don't necessarily have the skill to understand where the issues are, whether that be in promotion, whether that be in performance, because they don't hold the data. The analysis of the data isn't particularly robust. And then, unfortunately, a majority of organizations still try and fix the people. Well, let's do this for the women, or let's do this for the ethnically diverse groups, or let's do this for the disabled people. And the truth is that's not necessary. I'm a massive fan, and you change the process and the point and the way in which the decision is made, and the results happen. And that's exactly what we proved at HS2 when we introduced blind auditioning, which is not a blind CV. It's a completely anonymous skills-based assessment. And the shortlisting results for women jumped by 30%, for ethnically diverse groups jumped by 50%, for disabled groups it was 5 times the success rate. And that's not because those groups suddenly got brilliant overnight. We took a fundamentally broken process and we fixed the process, and the results followed after that. And of course, it's a skills-based assessment. And it's anonymous. There's no consideration of diversity up front. And the way we won the argument was we won the argument on technical skills and quality of hire. The diversity of hire was a subset of that. But that is what happens when you fix a broken recruitment process. And unfortunately, I think too many organizations believe that they have to have one type of hiring process for all kinds of roles. And it's just not the case. So I think there are fundamental issues with how recruitment is conducted, and then I think particularly that's probably even more exacerbated on the agency side, where often there are competing demands for who to blame. The employer blames the agency blames the employer. Somewhere in the middle probably is the truth. But in my experience, there's not a lot of challenge between client and agency on making a process equitable or ensuring the job description or the profile is written properly, or how you search for people in different sectors for transferable skills. Often, time and cost of hire is what determines whether an executive feels a recruitment function is doing its job properly. Whereas from my point of view, it would be diversity of hire and retention of hire, which shows that we've done things properly. So how you measure a team's effectiveness, whether that's agency in the contractual relationship or internal, will drive their performance and their priority. And I would suggest a vast majority of recruitment teams are targeted on time and cost of hire, not diversity of hire and retention.
Oh, I've got loads of follow-up questions to what you and Joe just said. I've been writing away. Before I come back to what you've both been speaking about, Laura, Naomi, can I come to you from a what is a slightly different perspective to outline what you think the problem is, and is there a problem, and what does recruitment look like for you?
I'll go first, Laura. It's Naomi.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting what Mark sort of said about the not the blind CVs, but just purely on technical. I'm just trying to think, if we did that here, would it make a lot of difference to our sort of equality and diversity? I don't think it would, because at the moment, taking it a step back from that, Mark, we're really struggling to attract those people, or different people from different backgrounds. We really tried to use different job boards and focusing more on disability sites and things like that. And we're just not getting the people in to be able even to do, a skills-based thing like that. So I really, we're really struggling to attract before we even get to a point of being able to, look at something in a more equitable sort of way.
Thank you for that honesty. And Laura, where are you currently?
Yeah, we're quite similar, to be honest, to Naomi, because we have a very male-dominated industry. I think it is a general issue, this, but I think in certain industries it's even worse than others. And I think sadly, the world of logistics, diversity inclusion isn't something that's high enough on the agenda for a lot of organisations. And we'd be honest within our organisation to say it's something that we haven't placed enough emphasis on up until more recently. And I think it's a lot about leadership and having the right drive. And when you're shaping your strategy for the next 5 years, making sure that this is key and it's not tokenistic, like Joe was saying, that it's really fed through to every single thing and every aspect of what you do. And I think that's what makes it really authentic then, and making sure you follow through with commitments as well. So I think for us, we are very much in the early stages of this journey, and we are realistic about how we can influence our members. We've got 8,500 members, and again, quite a lot of traditional organisations. And I think we are really trying to shape how best we can firstly get our own house in order internally, but then how we can help to shape some of our member organisations and then the wider, logistics industry. But we're realistic about that, and I think it's great that we can draw on best practices from other organisations, and that's very much where we're at the moment in our journey, and working with people like Joe to help us shape various practices that we're doing. And I think certainly from we're really trying to change the way in which we recruit. Just little tweaks here and there, and actually we've already seen that they've had a real positive influence. For example, giving the option to provide the interview questions to candidates before they come to interviews, because in terms of people that may be neurodivergent, that is something that's really helpful to them. And it was interesting, you see, when we first suggested that to recruiting managers, because I think, like we were saying before, I think that kind of awareness and education piece for hiring managers is so important in all of this, because you as an organisation can be trying to drive the right the right thing and your kind of equity at work project, but and strategy, but you need to have everyone on board with it, because ultimately they are the people that will be interviewing the candidates. And I think it's really important that you create that equity from the off in terms of for any candidate, so that you are providing a kind of welcoming environment, because that is the first time they have any kind of you've got any way of showing them what you're about as an organization. And it's such an important thing. And I think it's so often missed, because I think the traditional view still of the interview is that it's almost like a test. You have to really make it difficult for them. And certainly from the legal background I had, it was, interviews were hell. It was horrible, and you'd feel sick before them, and and people it was like running a marathon going to an interview. I don't think it's like that anymore. It certainly shouldn't be like that. But I think it's about, it should be very much a two-way thing. And that person, the candidate, whether they are right for the role or not, they should walk away feeling like it was a positive experience.
Wow, there's loads in there. I really like that you've mentioned that it should be a positive experience regardless of the outcome, because when we talk about hitting what Naomi said around attraction and actually getting people to think about the organisation in the first place, it's all part of that communication thing, isn't it? That somebody didn't get that role, but they don't walk away feeling bad about that experience, because no one really deserves that, and it's a learning and all the rest of it. But also it's about how they speak about your organisation. You mentioned a few things about hiring managers actually having that approach as well. And we often speak about EDI and all the conversations that we have just being like really isolated, and they shouldn't be. They should be part of the system, part of the makeup of an organisation. And we'll definitely talk a bit in a second around the role of hiring managers and what that intersection, I guess, looks like. A few of the key things that I was writing down when everyone was speaking, and I'd really love to come back to, are, I guess, some of the questions around what is a good process. And so, Mark, you mentioned around what is a truly anonymous process. And Joe, when you and I have spoken before, we've said about organisations sometimes just coming in and stripping names off CVs and saying, great, we've done that bit now, pick, that box has been ticked, why is it still not worked? I'd really like to come back to that for a moment, and Mark and Joe, if you can speak to that, but obviously Laura and Naomi, come in with your thoughts as well.
I think going back to what Mark said, and also what I actually what I do for a living, which is that skill piece. We first and foremost, when we're looking at how we evolve our recruitment processes and move away from that one size fits all methodology, we can't just assume that our hiring managers and everybody involved in the recruitment process are all of a sudden going to be able to to change what the habits, this habitual recruitment practice, the stuff that they've learned from day one. And we've got to see this as a change management project. We've got to provide the resources and training for everybody who is responsible for recruiting, within our businesses, including hiring managers. And that is so often under-resourced. It's just, I see this coming from a central place, whether that's HR or whether that's the ED&I lead, where it'll be, right, okay, we are going to do A, B, and C. And it might be, we are now going to anonymise CVs. We are now going to provide candidates with the questions before they come to interview. But there's a big education piece missed, so you don't get to win the hearts and minds, and you don't get the buy-in, and ultimately people will go off and do whatever they want anyway, and nothing will ever change. So it's like, if you are going to change your recruitment processes, first of all, you need to work with people with lived experience and people who are experts in hiring differently to be able to understand what all those different types of processes can look like. Because this is not just around changing from one process to another. This is that, like Mark said, this could be multiple processes for a whole range of different roles. And we've got to be able to provide those resources to be able to train and upskill our managers to be able to adapt and adopt, and most importantly, understand the reasons why we are doing this. And I just see this missed, and then we wonder why our initiatives and the things that we're changing are not landing and making a difference, to candidates.
What does inclusivity in recruitment actually look like? Because I've had various conversations with all of you, and I'm not a recruitment specialist, and I'm not an ED&I specialist either. And I've kind of come into this world just being curious, and it's in that curiosity that I can look and say, well, that's not quite working. And one of those things is, I've had lived experience of having anonymous recruitment processes, but when I've done it before, it's literally been the name's been taken off the CV. And whenever I speak to this, I say, but everyone knows the experiences that people in the sector have had. So you can see someone say they worked here, they worked here, they worked here, and you'll know exactly who that person is. So what does an anonymity actually look like? And then Mark, when you spoke about what a true process, I'm genuinely really interested. What does that anonymous process really mean?
Right. So yeah, I think I'll deal with a couple of things in sequence. The first, what does that anonymous process look like? So it starts from the job description, and this is where, you know, if you're a recruitment or D&I or whoever in the building is responsible for it doesn't have the skills, it falls down at each step, right? So the competence is fundamental to underpinning any process. But number one, it starts with the job description. So create the job description and make sure it's inclusive, there are no desirable criteria, there's no subjective criteria, etc., etc. The organization that we work with then turns that into a challenge. So something that is reflective of what you do in the day job. So for example, if it's an accounting role, you might get the monthly accounts ledger that has some mistakes to find. There's a report that you have to improve or demonstrate a better way of doing it, etc., etc. That challenge is looked at by the line manager to ensure that it reflects what they do in the day job, and sometimes even by the wider team to suggest areas to build into the challenge. Once that is finalized, that is then hosted on a system, and applicants that apply are directed to the system to complete their challenge. You have up to 3 days to complete the challenge, and applicants complete the challenge and submit it. That submission comes through anonymously, so candidate XYZ23 kind of thing. And the first couple of submissions that come through are calibrated against the model answer. So this is what the perfect answer would be, and so you do a little bit of calibration. And then after that, the system kind of marks the submissions, and they come through, and you then get you can get a grouping. So these candidates are dark green, highly technically efficient, very high scoring. These are light green, pretty good scoring, orange, borderline red, no. And the line manager will then pick, obviously, depending on how many people your organization interviews for a role, the 4 or 5 candidates who scored in the dark green, and that forms your interview pool. And in that way, you're eliminating the use of CVs. And the CV is not a competency-based document. So if you have a competency-based interview process and you recruit people via CVs at shortlisting, you got a fundamental process failure. And a lot of organizations do that, fall at the first hurdle. Because that's so anonymous, and because it is entirely skills-based and goes out as a challenge, essentially there are 2 things that happen. Number one, the candidates can self-select out, and you do see a higher dropout rate. Sometimes it's, oh, well, you know, I can't be bothered to put in 2 hours to complete a submission, so I'm not going to apply. Now, in all honesty, recruitment teams I've worked with in the past have been worried by that. Myself, I have no worry about that whatsoever. If you can't be bothered to do the challenge, then you couldn't be that interested in the role in the first place. So I'm not that bothered about it. But what comes out the other side is a really diverse pool of highly technically proficient candidates who, in a CV-based system, might be screened out because the recruiter only recognizes certain brands. Name recognition, meaning you must be a better applicant, or sector bias. Oh, you know, we need an accountant who's worked in infrastructure. Well, the last time I looked, numbers work the same in infrastructure as they do in insurance, right? So there are all these things that contribute to the process, and the hiring manager does not know who they're interviewing until they turn up for interview. Obviously, the recruitment team knows after they're selected and shortlisted. There were other interruptions that we put into both the interview and selection process, but that deals with the anonymous shortlisting. And like I said, it for any role where there's a technical element that can be tested, it's extremely effective. Not so, it wasn't a tool we used to recruit leadership levels where kind of influencing, negotiating, communication, et cetera, become or have a higher importance than just the technical skills. But from junior roles all the way up to kind of your mid-manager, SME type roles, it's extremely effective. It's not effective for something that is extremely specialist. So if I'm hiring a tunneling expert, well, then I need someone who's dug a tunnel, right? So and this is what I mean about there are types of roles for which different recruitment methodologies are the most effective.
So I live on LinkedIn, and one of the things I wanted to speak about was places like job boards like LinkedIn, where it's just, I always go to the easy apply because I'm sitting there, I'm like, that job sounds good, I can do that, easy apply, CV's gone, CV's gone, CV's gone. And that's just like the complete opposite of what you've said. And I can see the effectiveness of it. Like, Laura, what are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's blown my mind as well. It's just made me realise how, you know, we are really at the early stages of this kind of journey. And I think, you know, we are a relatively small organisation. For us, we are absolutely doing some work on our job descriptions and the way in which we advertise. We predominantly use LinkedIn, in all honesty. And we have what I would call a fairly basic interview process, in that we do get CVs in, and then we do you know, invite to interview, which will normally be two stages. And what we've been doing some work on recently is the interview questions. And we have some strong values that we, you know, as an organisation stand for. And what we've started to do is try, you know, in comparison to what Mark's talked about, this is very low level, but we have started to, you know, come up with some set questions that align to our values. And the reason we've done that is to kind of remove that thing of, you know, when managers say, oh, I just had a really good feeling about them, or my gut feel was this about them. And actually we want them to be able to articulate what that means. And by making the questions, or at least some of the questions that they ask, aligned to a particular set of values, I think that really helps remove that kind of gut feel, which sometimes can be the unconscious bias bit that creeps in, can't it, in terms of why someone's hired someone or prefers someone over someone else. So I think that's the kind of, you know, that is where we are at with our journey on this. And I think, you know, we would love to get to the stage where we're doing the kind of things that Mark's doing. But I think, like I said earlier, we need to be realistic. And also it's that huge education piece with the managers that we have that will be doing this. You know, I think yeah, we've got a long way to go. But I think, you know, it's one of those things, isn't it? And I know I've spoken to Joe about this previously, around creating that safe space to learn as well, and making sure that people are, you know, on board with it, and also not scared to make the wrong decisions or initially. But alongside that, you as an organisation are educating them and helping them to understand why you know, equity at work is so important. And I think that's the really key thing with all of this for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really right. And the more I'm having these conversations, I can really understand. And Joe and Mark both sit on the Women in Transport Intersectionality advisory group as well. And so I'm really learning from them around the need to, as you say, Joe, about getting your house in order, about creating the right culture around that safety, because you can have all the systems in place, but if you haven't got the kind of the mechanisms to keep people, then your next problem will be around retention, and which is an issue for the sector anyway. Naomi, I'd like to do a bit of a spotlight on what you said earlier, because you said quite openly around actually attracting people in the first place. And I personally, I mean, obviously, tell me how you feel, but I feel like that is part of the recruitment, because I feel like everything is an interview, and people that leave are still part of that kind of interview process, right? So what does that attraction look like for you now? Joe, Mark, Laura, come in. Like, how can we support Naomi in opening that up and to be more inclusive? Thoughts, please.
I mean, for me, when we were sort of talking about the attraction, one of the things I've been talking, and I'd be interested to know what other people, we've been talking about putting, you know, different processes and things in place around the recruitment, but you want them to be authentic, not a tick box. And, you know, I know other organisations in the past have done things like, you know, they wouldn't do a second round of interviews unless the shortlist panel was, you know, perhaps 50-50 men, women, or included somebody sort of from a minority ethnic background. And, you know, when I've sort of talked to our senior team about these sorts of things, you know, often we end up recruiting a majority person because our shortlist is all majority people. You know, and the guys have sort of said to me, well, yes, we'll, you know, we want to support this, we want to do that. And I said, well, maybe we might need to slow it down so we get you know, we trawl wider, we get more people in. Oh, well, that'll take too long. You know, we need to fill this role. And then I'm thinking, well, if we don't change anything, nothing else is going to change. So I'd be interested to know other people, because I think a bit like Laura, our company is small. So we don't get that luxury mark of being able, for people that dip out because they don't want to put in a covering letter or they don't want to go through a challenge, we'll end up with about one candidate and they probably won't be qualified. So we don't, I think, have the luxury of that brand attraction in the same way that perhaps some larger organisations do. And I think, say, like Laura, we're really on our early, you know, our diversity that we've got at the moment isn't bad, and I think we've got through more luck than judgment or our actions, to be honest.
I think we need to understand that this is a long game, right? That, you know, we want change, but we're not prepared to change. It's just, you know, it's an absolute like vicious cycle of never ever having an impact or having a result. And you know, the amount of work that needs to go into making your brand a brand that candidates trust, that candidates can see themselves being able to be successful, you know, within, that can take time. And I would say, if you are struggling with talent attraction and you haven't got an EVP, right, that clearly showcases the deep work that you are doing around changing your culture, changing your working environment, tackling inequality, providing various levels of different equity for everybody across your business, evolving your recruitment process, looking at salary equality, you know, looking at even talking about the data, right? All of this groundwork that needs to be done before you have an EVP that you are proud of, before you have a career page that is attractive to people who have been historically marginalized or excluded because of their background, identity, and circumstances. And it's all about how you tell the story of your business and how you talk through that journey. All of that stuff is, you know, candidates have got that this ED&I fatigue, right, is a real deal. People who are marginalized are sick and tired of listening or reading statements that tell them about how passionate and how committed and how much these businesses care about ED&I. What's missing is the detail on the action. What are you doing as a business? What have you done? What are the 10 things that you did last year to make my lived experience better within your organization? You know, what are the 10 things you are doing next year that will improve my lived experience? And the story is not able to be told because the work isn't being done. And that's why I'm saying, you know, it's a long game. And if you're looking at your EVP, if you're looking at your career pages, if you're looking at the stuff that goes into your job adverts and you're like, it's a bit blur, a bit naff, you're not ready. You know, and you're never going to be the finished product that's got every box ticked. But if you are focusing on recruiting people of colour into your business, right, I want to see your anti-racism work, right? I want to see the reason, what are you doing around race and ethnicity equality? I want to see your commitments to salary equality for those groups. I want to see what you're doing around making sure that Black and brown people within your organisation are not excluded, marginalised, or face discriminatory prejudice. It's like, you know, Shireen Daniels always say, I listen to her a lot, she always says, I want to see your receipts. And I absolutely think that that's what candidates want to see. They want to see evidence and receipts. So you can evolve and change your recruitment processes. You can do all of that incredible stuff, just to mention, building on what Mark said about the assessment piece, there's platforms like Be Applied that do all of that, where you can pick and choose all those different levels of assessment. Everything's anonymized. The guidance is there right through to the actual interview and the feedback piece. But if you've got nothing that sells your business as an inclusive and equitable employer, I would say, you're wasting your money and you're wasting your time and energy. And I know that sounds a bit neggy, but I'm just trying to emphasize the importance of getting your EVP right and doing the work.
I think that's right. Mark, I can see you nodding.
I mean, I think that's exactly right, particularly if you're a medium to large organization. And if you're a small employer, a small SME, then my suggestion is you think about things differently, because of course, if you start your recruitment process when there's a need for a role in a small business, I can understand that that may be more of a burning platform than in a huge organization when realistically you can deploy some resource from elsewhere. So don't start it then. Have the tap never turns off approach to your recruitment. Whether that be, do you want to do this or this? Like you can run creative campaigns, whether it's LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. Just think about a different way to do it. One of the companies that I've worked with in the past used to do that constantly. So very cheap adverts inviting people to take an assessment, yada da da da, which was short and sharp. And actually, whenever a job comes up, if you've done well on the assessment, we will contact you. So it's kind of like having an interview offer in the back pocket. Now, they were able to do that quite widely, and as an SME, it generated a decent amount of applicants for them, but at the point of need. So when the senior leader was saying, we really don't have time to advertise on diverse job boards and this, that, and the other, well, I could go to this sort of broad list of people that they'd been attracting over the last kind of 6 months and say, okay, we've got a pool to go back to. So I think there are a number of ways, and I think when I talk to recruitment teams or management teams about something, and they say, well, it's hard to do this or it's hard to do that, then my response is change the way you do it. And what have you got to lose? Right? If it costs you less, if it's quicker at the time, then there's absolutely nothing to lose. I think on the kind of the wider points on attraction, it's really hard to know whether job boards are effective for diversity unless you're getting the monitoring data through. Right? And you can spend a lot on job boards and not be getting stuff through. And again, that is about the message. But most candidates, when they want to check you out, they'll either check your website or they'll check Glassdoor. Right? So do some work to make sure that you're attractive, whether it's on your website or Glassdoor. And if you're an SME, maybe you don't go with the same blurb that you go with if you're a large organization. Maybe your blurb is around being nimble, getting experience of multiple roles, preparing you for senior leadership or bigger roles elsewhere. Why? And I would think about it that way. Why should I come to you? What's in it for me? And then if you look at your website and it's kind of boring, or there's one sort of person on the website, or it doesn't kind of reflect where you work, or it doesn't celebrate your success. And I don't mean in a corporate tone. Some of the most effective recruitment and attraction videos are little iPhone videos, which are shot with just people who work in the organization saying kind of what they do day to day and why they like working there. That doesn't cost you a penny. Maybe, okay, subtitling it might cost you a little bit. But it's those sorts of things which are authentic, are not a corporate voice, and having just a different kind of strategy around the attraction bit, particularly for SMEs, I think can be effective, because you can try one cheap thing this month, another cheap thing next month. As long as it's cheap, cheerful, quick, and different, you've probably not lost out from doing the same thing and not getting the result.
Love that. Naomi, how do you feel about that?
It is something I will certainly look into a bit more. Yeah, it's quite interesting, you know, just thinking about those things, because we all tend to go, as you say, to the LinkedIn, to the total jobs, you know, some more specialist things, but you're always doing job boards. You don't always think about, I mean, I know our website could do with a revamp.
Who needs to be involved in this whole journey, and what do they need to know?
Well, I think it's got to be everybody. I mean, the whole company's got to be, isn't it? It's got to be leadership. It's got marketing should help with the EVP and making it look good. We can get staff involved doing. I like the idea of the little videos explaining what you know different people do. But sometimes it is, and as I say, this sounds a bit, as like Joe was saying, a bit negative. But you know, sometimes these things are out of our hands. If you don't sort of have access to update those sorts of things, you know, on the website and whatnot, then our hands are a little tied. But I do think, as you know, like Laura, we're very early on our journey and could probably make some small tweaks that would certainly make a difference.
What Mark said really resonated with me about, you know, getting people, we're huge fans of getting people to do kind of like little videos, and we're trying to, our website is a key area of focus for us at the moment. So we're going to really reshape our kind of careers page and people page to be more focused on our values, but also it's really important, like we were saying before, for us to be authentic. So we don't want to pretend we're something that we're not. But I think it's also important to explain that we're on a journey, and this is what we're focusing on at the moment. On our careers page, it's more around the, you know, if you're going to interview with us, what does it look like, and almost filming like a little video of the candidate experience, you know, and things like that, just to try and put people's minds at ease a little bit. So rather than kind of big gestures, you just do these small snippets. And also something we're really focusing on at the moment is, I'm not sure if you've heard of there's two ladies that do this podcast called Squiggly Careers, and it's around this thing of, you know, gone are the days that people want to necessarily climb the corporate ladder, and it's now more around having, you know, different roles maybe within the same organization that you work at, and kind of more promotion from within, but that can be very much a sideways move. So, you know, placing more emphasis on things like that aren't necessarily specific diversity and inclusion work, but it's that thing that actually it's about trying to create equity at work, I suppose, in some way for all. And I think that's something that we're quite passionate about at the moment. And for example, you know, if someone comes to you with a training request and it doesn't necessarily fit their specific role, but actually it would really enhance their experience at work, and it's around them, you know, bringing them their whole self to work, and it's really important to them. Actually, why would you say no to that if you want to retain that talent within the organization? So it's things like that, and being more open-minded around that. And I think that's kind of a big piece of work we're doing from an HR perspective with managers, because they might they would be more inclined to just say no from a cost perspective, and they'd be thinking about revenue, etc.
I read a report a couple of years ago about the power of the recruitment industry, and in that report it said the recruitment industry control about 60% of UK permanent hires. And I think as the higher you work up, you know, the business, so you know, to C-suite and chief execs, the more apparent that is, just in terms of just how much control the recruitment industry have. And I talk openly about how I feel like the top 4, the top 5 Shrek companies, the main search firms, you know, they are ultimately, they're playing chess, right? You know, they have they've got their you know, their books, they've got their networks, and like ultimately they've been responsible for, you know, for creating what C-suite looks like for many years. And if we really want to, I think I think the recruitment industry across the board have a huge amount of responsibility. But I think that those top search firms and the other layers of search underneath 100% really need to look at potentially how we as an industry have contributed to overrepresentation. And most importantly, like, what can we now do about it? How can we collectively, turn the dial on that, move the needle, whatever you want to say. And there are certain things that if the recruitment industry together came together and said, right, we are no longer going to accept this, we are no longer going to ask for this, we will no longer do that, we could have an impact overnight. Can you imagine, if you're thinking about, like, from a salary equality perspective, if the recruitment industry collectively agreed as of today to stop asking people what their current salary was and stop providing that to clients, we could have a monumental impact on the salary gap, I feel. And it's just, and I guess a lot of the time, if you look at the recruitment industry, we have a fair amount of privilege. Okay, many of us haven't faced the barrier into work. Many of us, but the recruitment industry has I'll say it, and I don't mind saying it, has an overrepresentation issue, massively. It doesn't represent society. It doesn't represent the communities that we're looking to serve. And I think that because of that fact, we potentially are just not seeing some of the barriers that candidates are facing. Because we don't necessarily experience inequality, because we're not historically marginalised. Perhaps we've got blind spots. We don't see the issues, and we certainly don't see our responsibility in trying to evolve and change what we do. We don't feel the need.
Like, that really astounded me, what you say about the recruitment industry, is the amount of influence they have. And so I'm really interested to know, like, yes, people can make a change overnight, but would they? I really was going to play devil's advocate, is who does it suit to make the difference? And for me, the answer is that it's the hiring companies to then say, we're not going to work with you unless, right? Because someone's making money out of this. Why can't you, as the hiring company, say, we're not going to work with you unless you meet XYZ requirements? How does that feel?
Yeah, I get that. I think it's the reality, however, is if, we've got a situation where we're trying to recruit, let's say, an area manager, and they've come through an agency and we have no other, I think it goes back to being in, we haven't got a huge volumes of candidates, and we want that person, to a certain extent, the pressure that you would then have from the hiring manager, the other directors in the organization to recruit that person, arguably, even if their ethics aren't necessarily 100% aligned to what you're trying to drive as an organization, it's really tricky, isn't it, in reality, to get that balance right. And I think certainly when it's key roles within the organization, I think you'd always love to think that in that scenario you would be able to influence and do the right thing. But in reality, we need that candidate to start with us at a certain date, and that would be driving that decision-making process quite heavily, I would say. And I think that's indicative of quite a lot of our member organizations as well. They've got businesses to run, and they're the kind of pressures that we would face. But I think, certainly in terms of our desire would be to, we've done it recently where we had a less than positive experience in terms of an external training company that did some work for us around some inappropriate comments, and we're not going to use them again. So, we are starting that journey because we are in a position now where people recognize that things aren't right. Whereas I think in years gone by, maybe they would have been more tolerant. So we're really trying to drive this culture of if you see that something isn't right, you say about it and you raise the issue with people, including in that moment to the individual that's leading that. And I think it's part of that wider culture, isn't it? And with this whole equity at work journey, so it's a tough one, that.
Yeah, and I think there's no kind of cut and paste cookie cutter answer to this question, which is why it's really important to have a conversation about it. So what would be your advice for an organisation who is A, starting on this journey, and B, maybe thinks they're a little bit on the journey? What would you advise them if you were just meeting them today?
Can I just mention, just building on just something that Laura mentioned it then. I think that connects, that kind of, it connects into what you said at first, Laura, in that soundbite. Mark's suggestion of having almost like these evergreen roles, these consistently open roles that have got an assessment behind them rather than a CV, and you're almost like building up your passive talent pool. So they're not, not necessarily, and that could give you an alternative to this heavy reliance on the recruitment businesses that are not necessarily driven to support your ED&I agenda. I also think there needs to be a piece where hiring managers, internal recruitment businesses, anybody leading ED&I within a business has the tools to be able to audit their recruitment businesses fully. This pressure, things will only ever change when companies start to ask more of their recruitment businesses. And this is what I'm trying to gear the recruitment industry up to be prepared for. It's got to be a collaboration. Recruitment businesses have got to care enough about helping you, Laura, build a high-performing team. And if they know their stuff, they will understand that by supplying you consistently with exactly the same people, that is not going to help your business build a high-performing team. So I would therefore be suggesting alternative partners. And there are plenty of businesses, recruitment businesses, that are gearing up to equip themselves with skills and experience. And I absolutely love that commitment within Lloyd's, where they're actually, you need a license to do this stuff, right? Before we let you loose on external human beings and interviewing them, we are so committed to process that you will need a license following training. So I absolutely love that. I think, for any of the organisations that I meet before we start working together, I always want to know what their motivation is. What is their why? What are they hoping to achieve? Why is this work important to them? And sometimes this is a difficult question. Why now? And that is almost like an internal piece that needs to be done before you start working with anybody externally, before you start to bring in people into your organisation. Because if you can't articulate that, you are going to really struggle to convince anybody that this stuff really, really matters to you. I think, and I would say you've got your questions, like, why is this important? Why is it important to us now? And why have we only just noticed? And you get your leadership team together. You do not leave that room until you have a boardroom table full of thoughts and ideas and insight and perspective. And you go back and you go ask and re-ask that question. So then you are ready to be able to start on your journey and tell your story in a really, really authentic way. And that should be the foundations to you actually starting the work. Very, very, very important questions to kind of like ask yourself. I think that you need to be, it's all about doing a temperature check, right? The data is critical. So many organizations take a diversity hiring in approach first, without actually reaching out to their employee populations, regardless of the size, and really giving people a secure, confidential space to be able to talk about what makes them from a diversity and demographic perspective, and also for them to be able to talk confidentially about what their lived experience is of your organization. So then you can start to, that gives you a deep understanding of how people are thinking and feeling in relation to their identity, background and circumstances within your business. And that almost gives you, that's your place to work from. That, that's you're drawing a line in the sand, and you can then start to say, right, okay, we've got some immediate priorities here. We can see that this group here, so as an example, we can see that LGBTQ plus women in our organisation feel incredibly different about their opportunities for promotion than straight men in our business, right? So we can see there what can we do about that? And it's recognizing that not everybody has the same experience of our business. Often organizations will be like, we are inclusive, we are a great place to work, people feel like they belong. And I'm like, that's really interesting, that's brilliant. Who told you that? We just know. We just feel it. It's just part of our DNA. So I think it's, I'm always introducing, different people. I work with an organisation called Powered by Diversity, right? It's an incredible tool to lift the bonnet and really explore the data and how people feel in your organisation. And I would say for me, that would be the starting point.
Naomi, Laura, how do you feel about what Joe's just said?
Thing for me is the authenticity, because I think, asking that why and why now, because I think a lot of organisations, dare I say it, do it because they feel it's something that they should be doing, not because it's going to make a difference. I'm sure they do believe it'll make a difference, but I think deep down, maybe not, if I'm really being honest. And I don't like that. I don't want it to be a tick box exercise. I want people to feel. Now, we've done a little bit internally, and just recently, part of our LGBTQ plus community actually wrote a little blog or a little article for our ED&I monthly sort of post. And he was sharing how he felt very welcomed, could bring his authentic self to work. And it was really nice that he felt really comfortable to come out and talk about that to the entire company. So I think we're probably doing some things right, but not sure how we've got there. So yeah, there's more work to do. And I think, as you say, Joe, going back to let's look at the data. Some of it's easy to get, some of it's not so easy to get. With these quick applies and all of this, they don't come through your ATS system, you don't get the data. So it's, then if you don't let them do that, you lose your candidates. So there's a lot more, I think, that needs to be done, perhaps with the job boards and things, for us to be able to get that data and really know what's going on.
Yeah, I think it's really easy to feel overwhelmed. If you are at the start of your journey on this stuff and you listen to people like Joe and Mark, and there's so much you can do, and it almost feels quite intimidating. If I'm being honest, sometimes around some of the stuff, and you just think, oh gosh, we might never get there. But actually, you've got to also celebrate the positives that you do have. Just little things like, for example, today it's my daughter's first day at school. And I'm not going to be on the exec briefing this afternoon because I'm going to go and pick her up. And I've said to Claire, who's going to do my bit instead of me, tell people that's what I'm doing, because it's something that should be, so many people go through that, and we should be open about these things, shouldn't we? And I think even we're still so traditional in many ways in the workplace, and I think it's those little things that start to change. And I remember when I went to, I think it was a Women in Transport event, and Jo was speaking, and she said that point around the amount of care work or unpaid care work that the average woman does every day. I think it was something like 4 hours, wasn't it, Jo? It's crazy.
Yeah, 4.5 hours. Yeah.
4.5 hours, and thinking about that, and just getting people to be more mindful about what people have going on in their average day. And I always say this to my team and to the managers at work around, you don't know what people have got going on in their lives. Some people are very open, aren't they, about these things, but some people really aren't. And you've just got to treat people with that kind of everyday respect and dignity, and just and again, it comes down to the same thing with recruitment. We often have it where people are so focused, managers, on wanting to work to their agenda. So need to get people through the door on this date, this is when I'm free. They might only give candidates a day, half a day to prepare for a really important interview for them. And so that's part of our role from an HR perspective, in challenging them in terms of okay, that might work for you, but if you want people to be on their best, giving their absolute all to this interview, that's not going to work for candidates. And I think from an internal, recruitment perspective, when you're effectively the agency, but you're the HR team internally, I think it's really important for HR teams to put forward that challenge when it's required, and not just work to the hiring manager's agenda, because you will not get people performing at their best at interview, and also it's a reflection of your organization's brand as well. It's not the way to do it, in my view.
I love having these conversations because you're just constantly learning. And I just, Laura, what you said there, there's a tendency to feel overwhelmed. And I think, that's a valid feeling. It's not, there is no quick fix to any of this. It's definitely a journey, and it takes time, and it's not going to be, something that you can introduce a few initiatives to, and in 6 months' time your organisation is going to look completely different. But it's that being prepared to learn. And I've got a page full of notes that I've taken down from listening to everyone in the conversation. We are always learning, but what we've got to do is be prepared to listen. And I think sometimes we don't always listen enough, and we especially don't listen enough to the people who face barriers. And for me, it would be, start off with actually giving your employees a voice, seek feedback from candidates. And I think, really important point is, let's stop wrapping everything around people who already have the privilege of a job in your business. Let's start to hold managers accountable for flexibility, and and also going to what Mark said, really being honest about what your priority is here. Is it representation? Is it tackling over representation, or is it time to hire and cost? Because if it always goes back to time to hire and cost, you might as well put your resources in something else, because something's got to give. We can only change when we start to change our behavior and what we do, right?
Mark, what would be some top tips to take away?
So I think for me, it would be think through every single stage of your recruitment process. Number one, the portals that you're advertising on, are they accessible? Can disabled people use them with assistive technology? Have you thought about your job descriptions, the language in them? Have you thought about what assessment methods are right for the type of job that you're recruiting? What are you prioritizing? Time and cost of hire, or diversity and quality of hire? And you can find a nexus between all of those, I think. And then who's doing your recruiting, and are they skilled for it? For example, at Lloyd's, managers must pass an accredited inclusive recruitment course to be able to recruit. So I think those would be my takeaways. Think through every single bit of the process. Make sure you have some data, make sure you get candidate feedback, and really just chip away at it until you find those 3 or 4 things that make the difference for you.
So I think that brings us to the end of our podcast today. As ever, there's so much to be said on this topic, and there's so many things to consider in how we really move beyond bias and think about recruitment inclusively from the get-go. And as we've said, encouraging all departments to be involved with this, making it really clear to applicants as to what opportunities there are for them. And just really getting into the grips of what's that long-term recruitment look like for our organisation. So not just doing it per campaign, but maybe having that longer-term approach. We've spoken about culture, and we should get that right before we start encouraging people. So what's that attraction piece look like right the way through to recruitment, and then also to retention? So there's loads in there. I really hope our listeners today have managed to kind of capture some nuggets from this. And as ever, please share your thoughts in the socials. There's also a poll on the podcast as well. Let us know what you think about all of this. Thank you to our guests today, and I will see you on the next podcast.
You've been listening to the Women in Transport podcast. Join us next time as we hear more from the women in our sector Please visit the website for more details on how to become a member of Women in Transport, and remember to like, follow and share this podcast.